Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
Find a living in fisheries. The UAS Fisheries Technology Program offers online study from anywhere in Alaska, plus labs and workshops in many Alaska towns.
Is most likely a chum.
Find your living without leaving where you are. Fisheries Technology from UAS.
The National Weather Service.
Good evening, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service. It's the 31st of August, and as always, we encourage you to stay up to date with your local weather information at weather.gov/Alaska. You can always give us a call at the Alaska Weather Information Line at 800-472-0391. Find us on email as well, nws.ar.tvweather@noaa.gov. And if you need a little help navigating the changes we've made to our websites that serve you, please let us know. I'd be happy to walk you through the places you can find your climate information, your local forecast information, or some of the new things that we've added that might help make your planning and safety a little bit easier to accomplish. Remember last night we were talking about radiational cooling? Well, if you were in the interior, the west, the southwest, south central, the Kenai Peninsula, maybe even northern parts of southeast, you probably experienced this in some way. For many up across the North Slope, we had a cloudy sky, so what little radiation you received from the flaming ball of gas in outer space, it probably limited how cold it got last night, though it was probably cooler than many other places. For everybody else, the clear sky really allowed you to radiate that gained heat back into the atmosphere, and temperatures cooled off. One of the examples that we found from that this morning, just to kind of prove the point, was in Eagle River and Wasilla. Now, if you fly into South Central, you've probably passed over these places or nearby. Just for grins, here's Birchwood, and then Ted Stevens would be down here, and Lake Hood just a little bit off to the east, and then Jay Bear, and of course Girdwood a little bit further down the inlet. Up in the upper Eagle River, not quite to the Nature Center at 32 degrees, morning low temperature there, and just south of Wasilla Lake, 32 degrees there. That was the first time we noticed temperatures had been that cool so far this season. Kind of a cold shoulder from summer and moving on into the rest of the shoulder season into fall there as we get closer and closer to winter, of course. And one sign that winter's really never that far away in the North Slope is the UAF Gina Barrow Sea Ice Camera there. This is Barrow, of course. And you can see late this afternoon some chunks of ice again with northerly winds pushing again toward the coastline. So don't be surprised if you see a little bit more of that ice pack getting closer to the coast as we get from Barrow to about Wainwright, it looks like, with those northerly winds tonight, tomorrow, and into Friday probably before that lets up a little bit. Here's a look at the visible satellite picture, an actual snapshot from the clouds from outer space looking down on Alaska, and you can see around Canada and into northern and eastern sections of southeast, especially the interchannels, a little bit more cloud cover there, but there's still a little bit of dry air across the northern Gulf. That's trying to work its way back in following low pressure that's drifting south and east west of Haida Gwaii. The bulk of the cloud cover is obviously across the southern Bering all the way around the Aleutians here, around the Brooks Range as well, though we don't see that very well on this particular scan. Across the interior, a wealth of dry air, that across St. Lawrence Island into southwest, Bristol Bay, Kodiak Island, South Central, Copper River Basin. Why does that matter? Well, air, when it's dry, warms up and cools down significantly faster than when it does when it's wet. So think about the wettest, most humid day you've ever experienced in Alaska. The temperature probably didn't change a whole lot. But you know when it's dry, and especially when we have this kind of sunshine where it actually sets at night and then rises back in the morning, those temperature swings can be a little bit on the extreme side. And then if you add in some wind coming down off a mountain well, things can get just plain out of control. Here's a look at the infrared satellite picture, and once again you can see that circulation around southeast. Not a whole lot of moisture with this. It's kind of sloshing wet weather up in the southeast and then pulling back in the drier weather, continuing to fill this in and chew it up. Out across the interior, high pressure's in control. Things are dry, but we do have clouds working their way in to the North Slope, following a frontal boundary that's sitting in place across the North Slope. and some weak circulations that are trying to move their way to the south and east. And this is where all the cold air is flowing. Right now, hot air continues to sit across the interior, and you can see our circulation out across the western chain, gradually pulling up some of that Pacific moisture, but can't really move it eastward into that very stable and very dry part of the interior. Here's the weather map. High pressure sitting south of Kodiak Island at 1,019 millibars. Our weak wave of low pressure just west of Haida Gwaii. A stationary boundary working across the frontal, the north slope there, and because it's stationary, it's just not moving very much, and we don't expect it to move very much. There has been some reports of rain around AKwx and the western tip of Seward Peninsula, south and west, nothing but severe clear today. A beautiful day, and rain and drizzle out across the southern Bering Sea. Not quite to the Pribilofs, but we saw it not too far away. Tonight, that wave of wet weather, drizzle, showers, even a little bit of fog may push a little bit further northward toward the Pribilofs and out across the Alaska Peninsula, Sand Point. Nothing doing across south central, southwest, or the Capes into Norton Sound. Things look pretty dry, and even northern parts of southeast look fairly tame tonight. Showers across extreme southern parts of southeast, Hyder to Ketchikan and Annette, maybe Klawock. Up north, you see a few showers across the eastern Brooks Range, but high pressure is really in charge there as well. So more than likely, you'll see cool, cloudy, and foggy weather as we go through the rest of the nighttime hours. Tomorrow, more of the same for you in Barrow and Kaktovik to Prudhoe Bay and all the way out toward Point Lay and Point Hope. West of Tin City, you see the clouds dropping through the Bering Strait through Savunga and St. Lawrence Island, not quite to St. Matthew. Fog will lead the next push of moisture trying to work closer to southwestern Alaska. A much better chance that will arrive as we get into Friday, and you can see that slowly working its way closer and closer to Norton Sound with showers and drizzle closer to the Capes, Cape Newenham, for example, Bristol Bay, and another push of an occluded front coming out of the North Pacific that will probably invigorate the rain and drizzle and fog a little bit more across many of the Aleutian Islands themselves. The low pressure system itself still not really anything to write home about, 993 millibars there. High pressure is in charge of the Gulf, so small seas, light winds for Cook Inlet, Prince William Sound, and the northern Gulf, including Shelikof Strait. And we're going to be stuck under the gloom and probably some passing showers and drizzle for southeast. Things shouldn't be terribly windy for you. However, it doesn't look like you're going to clear out quite as much as what we'll see in the northern Gulf. Temps today, 50s and 60s for southeast. A beautiful day in the capital city to Sitka, to Ketchikan, and Annette. A little bit cooler for you. Hyder was 63. Angoon also fairly mild. Haines and Skagway mid-60s. Yakutat 69. Prince William Sound also toasty again. Cordova made it close to 70 degrees again today. Valdez 67, 73 in Seward, 70 in Kenai, and low 60s in Homer, 65 for Kodiak. Talkeetna was 73. Glen Allen and Gulkana in the mid 60s. Northway about the same. Eagle wasn't reporting, but if you look up the road a little bit, it was in the upper 50s as you get into the 40-mile country. 67 in Fairbanks, Tanana 64. Nenana, temperatures fairly mild for you as Healy was 61, 64 for Fort Greely, 59 in Fort Yukon, 46 for Arctic Village, 43 in Anaktuvuk Pass, and then we get into the cool and the cloudy weather creeping off the Arctic, and temps were only in the 30s and 40s. Kaktovik was 38. Barrow, one of the warmer spots really, along with areas closer to Wainwright out toward Prudhoe Bay, and then you get back into the cooler weather. Wainwright 36. Point Hope was about 46 degrees, 61 in Kivalina, 62 for Kotzebue. Our friends in Nome sitting at 67. 60 in Unalakleet, it was 65 in Galena, McGrath 66, 70 in Bethel, 65 for Nunivak Island and southwest into Bristol Bay. You saw temps in the 60s and 70s for King Salmon and Dillingham. Lake Iliamna also very mild and sunny today, 60s and 70s for areas all the way down to about Port Hayden, Cape Sarichef, a little bit on the cooler side, 50s and 60s there, 60 for Unalaska and Dutch Harbor, only 50s for St. Paul and St. George, but St. George, I should say, was the warmer spot today at 58. 55 for Adak, and it was 53 on Attu Island. Now, overnight lows, same story as last night. If you are clear, you're going to cool down. 30s and 40s for most of the interior. A few select spots with a little more cloud cover and a little more moisture might hold on to temperatures closer to 50 degrees in the west. 53 for Kodiak Island, low to mid 50s under the clouds for the Alaska Peninsula and the chain. Southeast, upper 40s and lower 50s. Prince William Sound in the lower 40s to start your day tomorrow. 30s and 40s for the North Slope. Looks like Barrow will be close to 39 with a high of 42 tomorrow. Again, not a big swing because you're not getting as much sunshine and you do have a lot wetter air in place as that northerly push comes in. Elsewhere, sunshine, dry air, 60s and 70s. You can see that all the way across the southwest into the Yukon Valley, all the way up into parts of the middle Tanana Valley around Fairbanks. 67 there, 61 in Eagle, 63 in Northway around Tok, 60s and 70s for South Central. Again, for the Susitna and Matanuska Valleys, a beautiful day. It might be a little breezy. 70 in Kodiak. Southeast, you're looking at low to mid 60s for your daytime tomorrow. On to flying weather. IFR conditions will start your day across the north slope all the way down through the Bering Strait and across the northern parts of the Seward Peninsula, as well as into areas inside of Kotzebue Sound from the Pribilofs all the way along the chain and the Pacific coast side. MVFR conditions are expected across the central Gulf and into southern parts of Southeast. That's how we start our day. As we get into the afternoon tomorrow, we do see some improvements across the north slope, but look at the coast, still hugging that IFR all the way across St. Lawrence Island, all the way through the Aleutians. Not too many problems for your interior passes, but we will see MVFR lurking across some parts of Southeast and around the Alaska Peninsula and near Kodiak Island tomorrow. Your pass conditions, again, if you're flying through Anaktuvuk Pass, you're going to have to wait on poor conditions across the north slope in the morning. Look for gradual improvements there and for Adigan Pass as we go through the day. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass look good. Rainy Pass, Isabel Pass, Windy Pass, everybody looks good all the way through the Alaska Range tomorrow. Mentasta Pass, we expect VFR. Tanita Pass, VFR conditions there. Portage Pass looks pretty good, and of course, so does Chilkoot and White Pass. Freezing levels show the warmest air sitting across southwestern Alaska, as we saw with the temperatures there earlier. Levels there at or above 12,000 feet, but you can see that cold air really isn't that far away. Levels as low as 4,000 to 6,000 feet across the eastern part of the Brooks Range, and we're holding levels closer to 4,000 to 6,000 feet across southeastern Alaska, as well as areas across the central and western chain. Icing potential is somewhat minimal, it looks like, light to isolated moderate at best. Most of that will be east of the Alcan and north of the Chilkoot and White Pass regions, but you could see a little bit of a sliver of icing potential there across Sand Point out toward Cold Bay and False Pass as that disturbance lingers across the southern Bering and out of the North Pacific, wrapping around low pressure there in the west. It's right under the jet stream, in fact, and you can see low pressure sitting just south of the chain, dragging in that unstable air and wrapping it around here, but it just can't beat the ridge of high pressure that's in charge all the way across the central Gulf and the Bering Sea. On the east side of that, though, is where that cool and unsettled weather is dropping back into southeastern Alaska. The bulk of that is staying just east of the higher terrain at the surface, so not a whole lot of precipitation coming out of the north, but that certainly is where the cooler weather comes from. At 9,000 feet, you can see winds are fairly light all the way across the Great Land, generally 5 to 10 knots in all cases, even out over the open waters of the Gulf. We get into some slightly stronger south and southeasterly winds for the central and western chain, 25 to about 35 knots, and generally easterlies as you get west of St. Matthew. Slightly stronger winds coming into the central and western Brooks Range at 3,000 feet, 25 knots there. Otherwise, a south and easterly flow for the Bering, 15 to 20, and gentle northwesterlies working down the southeast, about 5 to as high as 15 knots. So turbulence, not a big concern tomorrow, generally for the central and western chain below 4,000 feet. That's a look at your aviation forecast. I'll be back with a sea ice update and more in just a few minutes.
Tucked away near Soldovia, Alaska, along beautiful Kachemak Bay, is the Kositsna Bay Laboratory, which is operated in partnership by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration and the University of Alaska Fairbanks. This unique marine research and teaching laboratory is dedicated to excellence in marine science and provides a place where people can learn more about marine and coastal ecosystems. Here today to talk about the laboratory are its directors Chris Holderried and David Christie. Why is the location of the laboratory so important?
Jim, Kachemak Bay is a microcosm in many ways of southern Alaskan coastline. It has rocky coastlines, it has glaciers feeding into it, it has eelgrass beds at the head of the bay, and on the north side it has cliffs that are eroding into the bay. So we can, within just a few miles of the lab, we can access all these different types of ecosystems that live with these different environments.
So you have basically a small little world encapsulated in Kachemak Bay.
Provides a natural laboratory.
Yeah. Well, how long has the lab been around?
The lab's actually been around for as long as Alaska's been a state. It
Wow.
was originally constructed in 1959. There was a recognition back then that some of the same problems we face today with sustainable use of coastal resources, there were some challenges then, particularly in the herring fishery, and they saw the need for more science to understand those changes.
So who oversees the laboratory?
Well, the lab is actually run by NOAA through the National Ocean Service, and in the National Ocean Service it's part of our Coastal Ocean Science program. And then we're run in partnership with the University of Alaska Fairbanks. But one of the interesting things is we actually fall under what is called the Center for Coastal Fisheries and Habitat Research, which is another facility located in Beaufort, North Carolina. Some people say, how do you have this connection between coastal Alaska and coastal North Carolina? But if you look at the issues in both places between fishing and ecotourism and sustainable resources, and they are very, very similar. It's a pretty easy connection to make. There is one of our unique features in the lab is that there is a whole range of folks that get to use the laboratory, both from the research side and from supporting our education missions. On the research side, there's researchers from NOAA offices, from other federal agencies, from state agencies, and as well as university scientists. And from an education group, we've got college students, both undergraduate and graduate, and school children that come for field science camps.
That's outstanding. Well, describe some of the research that's being done at the laboratory.
Well, one of our main focus areas of research at the lab is how do we provide the science to sustain coastal resources. Obviously, use of coastal resources is very important in Alaska, and so how can we support that with good science? Some examples are understanding the underwater habitats and how fish and other species are using those habitats, and supporting uses like local mariculture that the oyster farmers are doing.
A lot of the research at the lab focuses around questions about how ecosystems work. How will they change in the future as temperatures potentially change? How will they change with changing amounts of sediment coming into the bay as the glaciers retreat? And in general, why are things where they are and how are they changing through time? And the particular areas that have been focused on recently in the lab are in the kelp forests, which are extensive in the bay, and of course they provide very good habitat for young fish and other animals, other organisms. And then the extensive intertidal zones. We have a 28-foot tidal range in the bay, which means between high and low tide there's very large areas in which a wide variety of marine organisms live. As we move into the future, we'll be increasingly adding components of instrumentation to the lab, so developing and experimenting with new ways of observing and measuring what's going on underwater when people can't be there.
So what classes are being taught at the lab?
There's quite a range of classes, and it changes every year. The big constant for the last 10 years has been the dive classes. We've trained well over 100 divers in that time. Last year there were 600 scuba dives conducted out of the lab. We have a range of classes taking advantage of the access to the ecosystems of the bay, classes on vertebrates, classes on invertebrates. We've had a climate change class there last summer, and a variety of things coming up. Some of the classes are taught by UAF professors, some are taught by our partners at University of Alaska Anchorage, and particularly the local Kenai Peninsula Community College in Homer, and also from Alaska Pacific University.
Partnerships. Can you touch on that, Chris? What partnerships have you forged to further the mission of the laboratory?
Yeah, central to how the laboratory operates is that we do most everything we do in partnership with other organizations. We're fairly limited in our federal staff. Right now we just have 2. And so to accomplish all the science missions and the education missions that NOAA wants in this area, we work obviously with the University of Alaska Fairbanks, other universities to do the education mission, as well as local marine education groups like the Center for Alaskan Coastal Studies in Homer. From a research perspective, we do a lot of work with other NOAA offices, so researchers from other NOAA offices, from in the state with the Kachemak Bay National Estuarine Research Reserve, which covers most of Kachemak Bay, and with the Alaska Department of Fish and Game. That's one of our big partners. And then nationally, we're working with other NOAA offices like the Office of Coast Survey, National Geodetic Survey, and other partners in our coastal ocean science programs.
How do you get the community involved?
Well, that's one of the really fun parts about where the laboratory is and who we get to work with. We do everything from, we have open houses for the general public. We make presentations out in the community. We also get scientists who come into the lab to do research to do presentations on their work, so they get wider exposure to that. We also have a lot of classes that are available for community members to take, as well as doing teacher training workshops and classes that teachers in the local schools, including local villages, can take. And then we do a fair amount of work with the local tribes from Seldovia, Port Graham, and Nenwalek. That's been primarily focused on education programs for the kids.
So what is your vision of the lab?
Jim, we're looking to continue to build the lab in partnership with all the people we work with around the Bay and elsewhere in Alaska to become the place where people choose to come when they have questions, so they want to investigate new ways of looking at coastal ecosystems all around southern Alaska. We want the lab in particular to be a place where we can deploy and test new technologies to see how they work in Alaskan conditions before we take them out into the rest of Alaska. And working from there, we're trying to get smarter about how we investigate coastal Alaska, because as you know, there are lots of places where you can't get to very easily, where there are no people. So we need to work out ways of developing instruments that we can put out there when there are no people around. We need to have ways to use the communities, to work with communities, to collect data that are of interest to them, but also that can be fed back to the lab and back to the world in general through the internet.
From a broad perspective, NOAA has an increasing focus on helping communities adapt to climate change. And so the lab is one of the places where we do the science to understand how these systems are changing, how they're changing now in response to climate change, in response to human activities and coastal development, things like that, and then how we can help communities to adapt to those changes in the future.
And thank you for joining us here on Alaska Weather Facts. Until next time.
Thanks, Jim. Here's a look at the Barrow Sea Ice Camera again from our friends at UAF and GINA, and you can see a few chunks of ice out there. The main pack is still way out to the north, but as you look at it with our sea ice analysis today from the Alaska Sea Ice Program, you can see the concentration above 80% really isn't all that far away from Barrow, and with northerly winds, it wouldn't be surprising to see some of that work its way southward toward the coastline, out toward Wainwright and Barrow in the next couple days. You want to check the concentration and the forecast yourself? Do that at weather.gov/Anchorage/ice. Here's a look at southeast marine forecast now, and north and westerly winds will be the predominant flow. A little bit of an opposing flow inside of Clarence Strait at 10 knots with a 2-foot sea, but elsewhere 10 to 15 knots from the north and northwest with 3-foot seas on the outside and the inside as you get up through Stevens Passage and into the Lynn Canal on Thursday. A little bit of a change on Friday, but not too much. Winds diminish in the northern areas down to about 5 knots or so with 2 to 3-foot seas on the outside until you get south of Sitka and into the Dixon Entrance region, where those could climb upwards of 4 feet or so on that northwesterly flow to 15 knots. The inside waters looking at 5 to 10 and 2-foot seas. It looks like a beautiful day to be out on the water on Friday, and if there's some drier air coming your way, don't think about it twice. Go have fun. Thursday, a gentle north wind across the northern Lynn Canal, 10 knots with a 2 to 3-foot sea, 4-foot seas west of the Barrens, and they go up a little higher as you get into Shelikof Strait with that southwesterly flow at 15 knots. 20-knot winds east of the Barrens and on the eastern side of Kodiak Island. Otherwise, light and variable winds across the north and western Gulf, 2 to 3-foot seas there on Thursday. And really not much of a change as we get into Friday. The strongest winds will be east of the Barrens, coming in easterly at 20 knots with a 4-foot sea. Otherwise, light and variable winds in the Cook Inlet, Shelikof Strait up to 5-foot seas there, 4-foot seas east of Kodiak Island, and 2-foot seas to get your weekend started as you head into Prince William Sound with light winds. Southeasterlies inside of Bristol Bay, 10 knots with a 2-foot sea. Down the Bering Sea coast, easterlies with a 15-knot wind, 3-foot seas out to Cape Sarachev. 6-foot seas for the Pacific coast, 15 to 20-knot winds from the east and southeast on Thursday. Not too bad. A little bit more of a southerly flow on Friday as the front continues to work its way northward just a little bit more. 10 to 15 across the Bering Sea coast, 20 knots for the Pacific coast, and 5 to 7-foot seas coming in on that southerly flow. For the Aleutians, east and southeasterly winds for the central and eastern chain, 3 to 5-foot seas in the Bering, and 6 to 8-foot seas across the Pacific. An east and northeasterly wind for Kiska out toward Attu, anywhere from 7 to about 11 feet there, really west of Adak. As you look at Friday, more of a northerly flow out in the west with 9-foot seas on a 25-knot wind, and stronger winds will push eastward just a little bit more, 20 to 25 across the Bering Sea coast, and 20 to 25 for the Pacific coast, looking at 8 to 9 foot seas there on Friday, again as that front continues to work its way into the southern Bering toward the weekend. As we get across the west coast, northeasterlies will be the strongest across St. Lawrence Island and west of St. Matthew at 25 knots. Otherwise, 15 knots in all areas. North and south of Nunivak Island in the Kuskokwim Delta and over the Pribilofs, looking at more of an easterly flow there, 15 knots with a 6-foot sea. By Friday, a little bit of a shift here closer to the coast. Easterlies north of Nunivak Island, southeasterlies just south of Etolan Strait, 15 knots with a 3-foot sea. Southeasterlies for the Pribilofs at 15. And we're going to hold on to those stronger winds coming in from the north and east. And under this is where we're going to find some of that cloud cover and certainly cooler weather as that works its way out of the Bering Strait. 8-foot seas there around St. Lawrence Island and west of St. Matthew Island. Now for the north slope. Remember, we're talking about those northerly winds. And here's the main sea ice pack right now. If that catches into that northerly flow, we could see some of that ice drifting its way out toward Barrow and Wainwright especially, and maybe some other choice locations. Easterlies for the Beaufort, though, looking at 3-foot seas. Otherwise, north and easterly winds coming down the Chukchi coast, 20 to 25, and 4 to 8-foot seas there, rounding Point Hope and into Kotzebue Sound. For Friday, northeasterlies continue south of Wainwright, Cape Lisburne, and Kotzebue Sound, 20 to 25, 3 to as high as 7-foot seas there for the Chukchi. But east of Point Barrow, you're looking at north and easterly winds, 10 knots with a 3-foot sea going toward the end of the week. Let's recap tonight's weather. Cool and cloudy weather will continue for the North Slope and the Brooks Range. A chance of showers mainly around Arctic Village to about Kaktovik and eastward. Otherwise, dry but cool conditions will continue for the interior, south central, southwest, Kodiak Island, Kenai Peninsula, and maybe even northern parts of southeast. A few showers for the southern part of southeast, and showers will continue across the southern Bering and the chain as a weak wave of low pressure lingers out there. But the story remains the same as we go into Thursday and Friday, with a little bit of a push from the wet weather out in the west as we get toward Friday. Thanks for watching.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
Support comes from the University of Alaska College Savings Plan, helping you and your child save for college every step of the way, from diapers to diploma. More information at uacollegesavings.com. Alaska weather is moving. From 5:30 p.m.,